Welcome to another episode of Bidishanomics. I am Sabika Syed, and with us Dr. Bidisha Bhattacharya, our consulting editor for economics, who takes your questions, dear members, on economics, global affairs, what's happening with energy crisis, all that you send our way. Bidisha, the first question is by Lakshmi Narayan, quite a detailed question. First of all, they're thanking you for the recommendations you gave last week, and they said that they will go through the books and they are thanking you for your article on Kerala's white paper. Now the question is the data that E20 fuel roughly takes 3000 plus liters of water to produce just 1 liter of sugarcane based ethanol accurate? If so, does it mean we are essentially just substituting foreign oil for our own domestic water? More importantly, what kind of incentives does this signal to people at large in Maharashtra and UP? By guaranteeing high prices for sugarcane, aren't we basically paying farmers in drought-prone regions like Marathwada to empty out their deep aquifers for short-term cash, accelerating a massive water crisis just to fix the import bill? Seems like a hard choice. They feel the government is just doubling on creating bad incentives that will have long-term negative impact on the ecology. They're also asking, how come we are in a situation where the Maharashtra government had to declare yet another farm loan waiver?
So, firstly, thank you for going through the piece on the Kerala white paper. And of course, the book recommendations that also, the questions that you ask give us insights, further insights as well into different facets of the world economy, global, from a global perspective and domestic as well. Now, this question, I must say, Sabika, is a very, very detailed question. And I'll take it in three parts. I'll first talk about the water number. The first question that was asked, that does it really take 3000 liters of water to produce 1 liter of ethanol? More or less, yes. So there are studies. One very comprehensive study, research has been done by the Indian Sugar and Bioenergy Manufacturers Association with ICAR, that has put the figure approximately as 2400 liters of water required to produce 1 liter of ethanol if traditional methods of irrigation are used. However, in case of drip irrigation, it is approximately 1634 liters of water. Independent estimates are around 2800 liters, but specifically now, you might say these numbers are terrible, but you must listen to what the Food Secretary, Mr. Sanjeev Chopra, spoke about rice-based ethanol at a government conference, where it has said to produce 1 liter of ethanol from rice requires 10,790 liters of water. Because the process of rice cultivation itself requires up to 2,000 to 3,000 liters of water. So now, in that sense, sugarcane is actually a more water efficient option if we have to compare between water and rice, to be specific. So now here's something that matters greatly, because the actual water utilization in the factory that produces ethanol is roughly 3.5 liters. So that extra additional 2000 liters is actually that is embedded in the process of cultivating that particular crop, say for instance, and both these crops require a lot of water to grow. Now coming to the substitution problem, where Lakshmi Narayan asked that, are we substituting foreign oil for domestic water? Now, to an extent, yes. Actually, yes, I'm being modest, but yes. And that's a fair way to put it as well. Because now here I would like to talk about this concept of externality, Now, what happens is when we import oil from the rest of the world, our oil import bill increases, and that document, that balance sheet, it reflects on our balance sheet. That data is publicly available, newspapers report it. However, if a farmer sitting in Beer district is taking out water from underground, 200-meter deep, and using electricity that is either free or very cheap, that does not get reflected in the balance sheet. So in some way or the other, when that data doesn't show, we tend to not count that as cost, at least right now. And in the future, probably when the water will deplete to a huge extent, that is the time that we will consider this as to be a big problem. So definitely from the substitution problem point of view, this is something that has been happening, and which is why I spoke about externality. Like a real cost, externality can be positive externality or negative externality. externality. Negative externality is what I'm talking about here, where the real cost falls on somebody else or the future generation, not a government that is suffering in the present circumstances. So then comes the incentives problem that he highlighted, where the question was, what signal does this send to the farmers? Now let me put myself in Marathwada in this particular instance. For instance, I am a farmer in Marathwada, and the government says that there will be a guaranteed transfer if I grow sugarcane. There is a law that has been passed that the sugar mills will have to purchase the sugarcane from the farmer, and at the same time the free electricity that is required to withdraw this underground water to sort of grow, and in terms of cultivation as well, that free electricity or that electricity is either free or very, very cheap. Now, as per economics, the rational choice for a farmer is obviously he will produce and he will grow and cultivate sugarcane. Why would he grow any other agricultural commodity for that matter? Which is why I have reiterated this even in previous episodes, even in my opinion columns, that the fault is not the farmers. The policy is something that needs to be looked into. So here comes also the minimum support price system guarantees in terms of these cash crops, sugarcane, for instance, rice, even for that matter. So now here comes a very big tragedy. I would like to state this data here, that 1 acre of sugarcane requires roughly 100 lakh liters of water in a year, right? However, the 1 acre of millets, bajra, jawar, that the Deccan has been growing for decades for that matter, requires 12 lakh liters, which is 1/8 of what sugarcane requires. Literally 1/8. Now, is that showing in the data? Is that showing in results? Absolutely it is. I'll give you another estimate here. In Maharashtra, because the question also focuses on Maharashtra, sugarcane accounts for just 4% of Maharashtra's crop area. However, it consumes 2/3 of the irrigated water of Maharashtra. So 4% of crop area, 2/3 of the irrigated water. So here the result is, of course, we all know Marathwada is a very, very drought prone region. It's one of the driest regions in India. And the underground, there have been multiple reports, but the underground the groundwater has gone down to 245 meters in just 30 years. And there are farmers who have said that when we were young, we could find underground water in just 6 meters. Now there are bored wells that go down even below 300 meters and they come out dry. So in this particular situation, in 2016 as well, Indian Railways ran a sort of a Jaldoot Express that supplied water for like 343 kilometers to Latur district and different other districts there. And it supplied a lot of water. So here again another concept comes to my mind, which is the perverse incentive of in economics, which is where like a well-meaning policy, the policy might have been well-meaning, but it has distorted the behavior in such a way that it's actually turning out to be degrading or negative for the economy as a whole, and that's exactly what we are witnessing right now. Next, coming to the final bit, which is the loan waiver question. Now here Maharashtra, as he very rightly stated, Maharashtra has actually given out 3 farm loan waivers, one in 2017, one in 2019, and now one that has been recently approved of up to 2 lakh between of any farm loan waiver up to 2 lakh between 2019 and 2025. Now, what happens in this particular situation is, I'll bring the concept of moral hazard. If a group or a community of farmers think that they can get away and their loans can be waived off, why would they pay back the loan? And that's exactly, this is where politics also comes into the picture. Every single time, then the underlying trap is these farmers, especially in these regions which very dry or drought prone, they are being forced by the system, by the policies, to grow cash crops, sugarcane, cotton, etc. Now in that process, of course, now these require a lot of water, and they either the soil or the field remains barren, or they are not being able to cultivate as much. Hence, the farmer at times, most often than not, they're not being able to pay back the loan. Now, what do they do? Right now, the predictability has been so that they know exactly that even if we don't pay back, our loans will be waived off, and they expect the same because they've seen it consecutively and very close to one another. 2017, 2019, and now between 2019 and 2025. Now, this creates an issue of moral hazard, as I said, that specifically talks about a policy, but because of that policy, that is something that is actually supposed to be helping farmers, is turning out in a way where the government ends up with more deficit. And of course, the farmer, I mean, it's profitable for the farmers because they are getting some guarantees. Their loans are also being waived off at the same time. And why not grow a cash crop that for sure will be sold to mills and to different other businesses and companies for sure. So to answer finally to Lakshmi Narayan as to, is the government trying to solve the oil import problem? There are, of course, guaranteed prices, free electricities, all these that are sort of being given, but somehow it has to be ensured that these are not being misused to a certain extent where we lose out, and water depletion increases to a big scale for that matter. Because if we are trying to focus on, and the budget 2026-27 has also spoken about global data centers, increasing the global data center capacity, which in the last episode itself we discussed, it consumes huge amounts of water. So then it gets very risky for the government to regulate agricultural policy makers to sit and understand where to regulate and how to regulate this entire bit. So which is why, again, I'll repeat and I'll end this answer with saying the same thing, that it is not the farmer, it's the policy.
Bidisha, the next question is by Saito. They're asking, what is the state of our oil exploration, remote sensing for hydrocarbon resources, land or water? Is it possible to still find oil in our backyard so we don't have to bear the brunt of the Middle East volatility?
Interesting question. As I mean, we have multiple times we've discussed, India is an import dependent economy, and especially when it comes to oil, we've been importing 88% of our crude oil. Approximately 242 as per the 2024-25 data, which is the latest data. We have imported around 242 million tons of crude oil, while the domestic production remains at 28.7 million tons. Does that mean that we don't have the capacity? That would be incorrect right now to say so, because now why? Most people think that, of course, forever we'll have to be dependent on oil or crude oil to Saudi Arabia, to the Middle East in general, to Russia. But India has not been a country that has been thoroughly explored yet. In fact, not thoroughly explored at all. However, there have been certain positive sort of signs that the government has shown, which I would like to state. The first being that India has mapped 26 sedimentary basins, basically geological formations where oil and gas, they tend to accumulate. Now, together they cover approximately 3.36 million square kilometers, and out of that, only 10% of that area has been explored, which is up from 6% back in 2015, which is not, that pretty much implies that 90% has not yet been explored, which has huge amount of potential to sort of extract or produce the kind of oil that we are right now being dependent on other countries for. Here, I mean, specifically, I would like to mention certain basins. Right now, we have been producing oil from roughly 4 to 5 areas. For decades, we've been doing that. The Mumbai offshore basin, Krishna Godavari basin of the Andhra coast, Assam, Rajasthan. Now, there is a largely untapped area as well. Specifically the area, there are different reports, but there's an S&P report as well that talks about Mahanadi, Andaman Sea, Kerala and Konkan and Bengal. So this could hold up approximately, the report states, 22 billion barrels of oil equivalent between them. To put this in perspective, there is a Permian basin in Texas, which is one of the richest richest sources or richest areas or zones rather, I'd say, for America, which produces approximately 14 billion barrels of oil, and our potential is 22 billion barrels of oil. So definitely this is an area that needs to be explored. There is a piece a couple of months ago where I had spoken about how high time India needs to increase its mining, if it has to reduce its import dependency. So now, but it's important to now look into what is exactly happening right now. What is India doing? What has India done so far? Now there has been a program that the government has launched called Mission Anveshan, which it's one of the largest seismic mapping programs with a budget of 792 crore, and they plan to do 20,000 ground seismic surveys. Out of that, 8,000 they have already completed, and they have found some areas specifically. I would like to mention these areas. Seismic surveys are basically, how geologists take X-ray of the earth. So they kind of send sound waves underground, and on the basis of that, the wave that is reflected back, on the basis of that, the shape of the rock, the composition, they can figure out, okay, how much oil or gas is being trapped. Now in this particular situation, in May 2025, ONGC has come out with two major new oil and gas discoveries. One is called Suryamani and the other is called Vajramani. During the testing process, Suryamani produced 2,235 barrels of oil per day during testing. Vajramani also produced 2,122 barrels per day. Now, they have also announced a fresh discovery in the Krishna Godavari basin as well in the same month, but the data for that is not available as of now. However, there's also something very interesting. In September 2025, the government also found that there's huge potential of natural gas sourcing and producing in the Andaman. So this is something, approximately 87% of methane. The petroleum minister has also stated that this is a big step towards reducing our import dependency. So here the goal is not end import dependency and become more of an exporting nation, but even if we could drop from 88% dependence to 70%, that will be a big leap for us, because that will put much less pressure on the rupee than it is doing right now. So now moving to the satellite angle as well, that was the viewer very rightly mentioned. So it definitely, satellites and technology are being used, and satellites can detect basically what geologists call hydrocarbon micro seepage. So there are basically at times rocks kind of leak oil and gas that changes the sort of chemical composition of the soil and affect the vegetation. So satellites and kind of aircraft surveys help greatly with that, which also at the same time they are doing some gravitational surveys as well. I'm not a geologist, but at least from the basic reports that we've come across, it's moving around and seeing where the gravitational pull is a little higher, and accordingly they are predicting as to which are the areas which has more oil or which has more gas or which might have other minerals and critical minerals and metals as well, for that matter. So now the final bit is, of course, I'll have to be a little honest here. Finding oil and producing oil mein zameen asman ka farak hai. So finding oil, of course, I said this is the potential that India has. I've given you the data, but producing oil requires a lot of infrastructure. It requires midstream capabilities. A couple of episodes earlier in Bidishanomics, we spoke about how India lacks midstream capability or refining capacity, and that is very costly. That, of course, building that infrastructure requires a lot of money, but at the same time, you need to start somewhere if you are planning to reduce your energy dependency and become green and clean by 2047. So this would be my response.
Right. Bidisha, the next question is by Anil. They're mentioning that recently the RBI announced better rates for NRIs to hold foreign currency in their FCNR accounts. Is it a response to the ongoing crisis and the outflow of foreign currency from India, or will this stay for longer beyond the West Asia crisis?
Now, let's first understand one thing. India, or RBI, has been witnessing something that RBI did not want to witness in the first 6 months of 2026. There, apart from the rupee depreciating and apart from the foreign exchange reserves falling, there has been massive foreign capital outflows that RBI has witnessed recently, be it FDI or FPI. We have spoken about this in the earlier episodes as well. Now, this has put extreme pressure on the rupee. The rupee has depreciated by 6% in the last 6 months. And even in 2025, India was performing as some reports say it's one of the worst performing, it was one of the worst performing currencies. Some reports say it was stated as the worst performing currency in 2025 because it had depreciated by 10% in 2025. Now, what happens in this situation is that 88%, as I stated, we are importing our crude oil, we are importing from the rest of the world. There are other commodities as well that we are importing from the rest of the world, which is putting a lot of pressure because every time the oil price increases, and it will, I mean, oil price, oil related other commodity prices, fuel prices, everything will sort of, the minute it escalates, our import bill goes up. The more the import bill will keep going up, the more dollars we will require to purchase the same quantity of oil, and that means that we will have to exchange rupees for dollars, and hence it will depreciate the rupee even further. Now, coming to something which is very interesting that he spoke about, which is the NRI deposit flows and the FCNR account. Now, before I get into what is exactly the FCNR account, here is one important data point. The NRI deposit inflows have dropped from $7 billion in the financial year 2025 to less than $1 billion so far in 2026. So now moving to what exactly is the FCNR account. Now imagine you are somebody who is living in New York. You are an NRI who is living in New York, and you're saving in dollars, and you would like to send a good chunk of that money to India and deposit that somewhere. But your first fear arises is that, suppose for instance I send $100 or some amount of dollars, and at that point in time it was worth 800 rupees in India. However, because of some rupee movement, the rupee weakens, the rupee falls, or some sort of movement, when I come back to withdraw that money, I see that now it is worth 700 rupees. So without even doing anything, I have lost the value of the money that I had deposited. FCNR account kind of clears that risk or that fear completely, which is where it says that, if you deposit $100 or whatever amount in dollars that you're depositing with our bank, we will not exchange it, or we will not convert it into rupees or any other currency for that matter. It will remain in dollars. You will be paid a certain amount of interest. The RBI usually pays, or the banks usually pay around 3 to 3.5%, and which seems like a decent interest rate. However, not very competitive. Something can look like a decent or a modest interest rate, but it might not be competitive because US is also offering an interest rate. So why will an NRI send a good amount of money here? So, but there's a reason for it, because there's a certain amount of insurance that the banks pay as well, because if they are now holding that deposit of dollars and they plan to do something with that amount of money, use it for, convert it into rupees or use it for some kind of investment, in that particular situation there's an insurance cost that they pay, a price that they pay, which is approximately 2.5%. This is nothing but the definition of hedging that they do. So here, which is why they can charge a 3 to 3.5%. Now RBI comes into the picture, and RBI says that from June 8th onwards, and this question is very pertinent because just a few days back RBI announced this, from 8th June onwards up till September 30th, any kind of transactions of this kind or any kind of deposits of this kind, we will pay the insurance cost. The RBI has gone and told this to banks, and we will take care of the hedge cost. We will take care of that 2.5% interest. As a result, what has happened? ICICI, Axis Bank, Bank of Baroda, all of them increased the interest rate to 7.1%. It's ranging between 6.9 to 7.1%. Hence, of course, that resulted in inflows. Now, firstly, it might seem as a great tool that the RBI has done. Is it something that they have done for the first time? No, this was done for the first time, at least to my knowledge, in 2013 by a man I greatly admire, Dr. Raghuram Rajan. When he was the RBI governor, there was a currency crisis, the taper tantrum in 2013. This was the time when he specifically had, deployed this option, and he had called it, quote unquote, the least bad option. And exactly the same thing that they had done, that he had increased the FCNR rate, and that resulted in $34 billion of dollars coming into the sort of RBI's kitty, and 12% of that of the foreign exchange reserves was that, and as a result of which the rupee had stabilized. So this is something that RBI is doing this time as well in 2026. However, there are risks associated with it, because now, back then, the US interest rate was also modest enough. Now the US interest rates are also very high. So now, of course, I mean, just out of your love for your country, you will not send across the money. But there are results, and there are reports and analysis that are being done, that if this plan goes well, approximately 50 billion can enter into the country in FCNR deposits, and it might stabilize the rupee to 94 rupees per dollar in the medium term, at least. So this, firstly, that this is not happening for the first time. Dr. Rajan had done it. And secondly, definitely, because the RBI annual report recently has also clarified and stated that the inflation, most of this inflation that is happening, is because of the external shock, explicitly stated this. Hence, this is definitely a smart move, and only time will tell. And here I would like to mention one particular mechanism as well, which the RBI, I have a feeling that RBI is doing right now, which is called the signaling mechanism. Basically, it's not just about bringing the dollars in the country. It is also about putting a message across to every foreign investor, to every other market outside India, that the central bank sitting here is very, very actively looking to defend the rupee. And they are coming up with policies that are making sure that they will not let the rupee go haywire or beyond a certain number. So this is also putting a signal and a message across. And then comes the last final part of the question that was asked, that Anil had asked, that will this stay beyond West Asia crisis? I don't think so. This was very explicitly stated by RBI that this is between June 8th and September 30. It is going to be a short-term thing, and this is definitely a response to the West Asia crisis. But FCNR deposits as a mechanism is permanent. So that is here to stay. But will this stay beyond the crisis? I don't think so.
Okay. Bidisha, the next question is by Ranjit Pal. He's asking, what will happen if RBI doesn't increase interest rate despite of increasing inflation, and what effect will it have on government bond market and rupee currency value?
Very interesting question, because this takes us to the textbooks. Usually what we have read in monetary policy, that whenever inflation increases, the RBI increases, or the banks increase the interest rate in order to curb inflation. But now what's happening is something very interesting. Before I get to why RBI is not increasing the interest rate or maintaining a neutral stance, firstly, the RBI has one main lever, or as I used to tell my students, the Brahmastra to control inflation, only one, which is called the repo rate, which is basically the interest rate at which RBI lends to the banks. Right now, if there is inflation in the economy, what the RBI does is it will increase the repo rate. If it increases the repo rates, obviously it'll be difficult for the commercial banks to lend money from RBI at a lower interest rate, and they will push that cost to you and I. If we are going for a home loan or a business loan, we will have to now pay a higher interest rate. As a result of which, we will decide that, okay, fine, let's take the home loan a year later or 6 months later. Or businesses will also start contracting. They will decide to keep on hold expanding a factory at this point in time. As a result of which, overall aggregate demand or economic growth slows down, and prices eventually start falling. On the other hand, the exact opposite happens when RBI decides to not move the repo rate or reduce the repo rate. Now what that happens is, again at the same time, because now banks are borrowing money from RBI at lower interest rate, they will pass this benefit on to the consumers, and we will also be able to take loans, businesses, business loans, home loans at much lower interest rate. Now hence, of course, the aggregate demand, spending will increase, aggregate demand will increase, and if supply can't keep up with demand, then prices will also keep increasing even further. Now comes something very interesting. As of June 2026, the RBI decided to keep the repo rate the same at 5.25%, which is saying that maintaining a neutral stance. So here, and inflation is projected to be 5.1% for the entire year, and especially higher for the third and the fourth quarter. To be specific, that has been the projections. So the question is, now what happens to ordinary people? Then in this, but right now, as we sit, what is the situation then? Interest rate has not changed, inflation is rising, so the value of your money will be less. Your savings accounts, that value will fall. As a result of which, now businesses will also face the same problem. The raw materials, oil, different other raw materials that they utilize for their production processes, there as well there will be sort of, they cannot raise the prices immediately at the same time, because of course there has to be, like, if businesses increase the prices, there has to be purchasing power as well. People need to purchase, right? They will stop purchasing. There'll be a curb in spending, for that matter. Now this kind of creates an inflationary spiral where inflation starts feeding itself, because this will put, in terms of investments on hold, this will put even more pressure on the rupee. That will create even more inflation, and import bill any which way because of external shocks is rising. That will increase the inflation even further. So that's kind of a spiral that there is a possibility that might happen. Now moving to very important angle that this question spoke about is it's the government bonds market. Now firstly, it's important to understand what is exactly the bond market. Okay, so now if the government decides to build roads, schools, certain public infrastructure for that matter, it can borrow money from the public by issuing bonds. So basically it tells the public that you issue a bond of say 100 rupees, and we will pay you back that 100 rupees in the next couple of years, but we will also be paying you a certain interest payment for every year. So now there's one textbook fact or arithmetic, and I'll explain how, that bond prices and interest rates always move in opposite directions. When interest rates increase, bond prices fall. When interest rate falls, bond prices increase. Now I'll tell you exactly why. So imagine that you've purchased a government bond that pays 7% interest, and tomorrow you see that inflation is increasing, so you expect that interest rates, of course, I mean that's textbook, the central bank will increase the interest rate. So you expect now that in the future the bond market valuations will go up with an interest rate of 8 to 9%. So the value of the bond that you issued has gone down, and nobody will buy it. So here, or in full amount, so the market price falls, and that's exactly what happens. Interest rate and bond prices always move in opposite directions. Now here, speaking about just a little bit of data, that when oil prices surged over $100 a barrel following the West Asia conflict, the 10-year government bond yield, it had pushed the 10-year government bond yield to around 7.1%, and especially in May 2026 it had gone up from 6.97 to 7.03%. Now you'll say 6-7 basis points ka hi to increase hua hai. It means a big amount, because it means billions of rupees in the market. So as a result of which, the RBI usually does not raise rates in the face of rising inflation, because it does affect the bond market. It affects expectations as well. Now inflation expectations also entered into the picture, because that gets dangerous when inflation expectations enter into the picture, because workers start demanding higher wages. Businesses also think about whether to hire the exact same amount of people that they had projected to hire, because now they'll have to pay higher wages. They will also increase the prices or their price projections for the future, and that even without or unintentionally increases your inflation even further. Now the question is also just tying all of this to the final end of the thread, which is the rupee.
Yeah.
Now the rupee suffers even more because of this entire bit, and the fact that interest rate has not increased. I'll tell you what's exactly happening, or there's a possibility of happening. The inflation is increasing, and the central bank decided we will not increase, we'll maintain a neutral stance, we will not increase the interest rate. Global investors who had parked their money here,
Yeah.
they will say, why will I keep my money here when I'm getting higher interest rate in some other country? And they'll pull out the funds. That will lead to even more capital outflows. That will lead to our increasing pressure, even further pressure on the rupee, and at the same time which will make it even costlier for us to pay for our imports, and as a result that will lead to even more inflation.
Yeah.
Now the riskier bit is, as long as it is a part of headline inflation. We have spoken about this a couple of episodes back, the difference between headline and core inflation. As long as it is reflecting only in headline inflation, which incorporates food and fuel prices, it's still safe. The minute it seeps into core inflation, which is right now at 3.7%, but the minute that starts increasing, then it gets very risky.
Okay.
Then it's something, to be wary of. Definitely, knowing everything, does RBI not know that it shouldn't have kept a neutral stance, or it should have increased the interest rate? Absolutely it did. But keeping a neutral stance right now is actually the smartest policy, or the smartest move that the central bank could have done, given the external vulnerabilities, the external shocks, and predominantly rightly so, as the RBI annual report explicitly stated. The governor has also spoken about it, that a huge section of this inflation is because of external shocks, not domestic driven.
Okay.
It is externally driven. So if they increase the interest rates right now, domestic consumption will take a hit, and we are one of the fastest growing economies. That will slow down, and we cannot afford to do that at this point in time.
Right. Bidisha, the last question is by Saito again. They're asking, what do you think about the iceberg index? Does India have a directory of skills for each state or city so that policymakers can make informed decisions for enabling the AI transition for the vulnerable skilled people? Can Skill India pull it off? Was it ever effective in the first place? Also, in the study they've mentioned, which is Iceberg Index Chopra 2025, in that study, administrative report writing, info retrieval, data crunching jobs ranked pretty high on the index. Do you think AI will start eating up the Sarkari Babu file passing jobs?
Now you asked 4 questions, and I like all 4 of them. So I'll try and answer all 4 of them. We'll go one by one. The first, you spoke about the iceberg index. Now, why does it matter? So this Chopra et al. That you said. So Ayush Chopra, in October 2025, he came up with this iceberg index with his colleagues at MIT and Oak Ridge National Laboratory, that specifically focused on, the core idea was that traditional workforce and any kind of disruption, when it impacts traditional workforce, the data that we get is after the distortion has already happened. People have lost their jobs. Then the policymakers are sitting with that data as to what to do. The name is kind of very interesting here. Basically, it tells you, and the data that has been taken is of the American labor market. Now, the analysis shows, it is basically around AI. Now, the analysis shows that visible AI adoption, which is concentrated in computing, technology for that matter, which can replace, the labor force to an extent, that is representing roughly 22.2% of wage value, which is roughly $211 billion. Now, that is just the tip of the iceberg. What is happening for the rest? The technical capability or the cognitive capability extends far beyond and below the surface, in the automation or these basic tasks, the data entry, the kind of designing a particular letter that needs to go, or a format for that matter, administrative, financial, clerical stuff, basically. So that accounts for 11.7% of wage value, which is roughly $1.2 trillion. Now that exposure is huge, and that can be like a huge hit to any labor market, not necessarily just the American labor market. So here, which is why I said the name is perfect, because the tip of the iceberg is what we are seeing, but what's underneath is not still visible to us. So there is definitely a technical exposure, and the workforce would be in every sector would be heavily impacted, and that, we're just being able to see the tip of the iceberg. We're not being able to now, from a data point of view, visually being able to see, or from an infographic point of view, what's underneath that's coming. Now coming to the second question, does India have anything like this? Now the honest answer is we have the raw ingredients, we just don't have the framework in place. India has the National Classification of Occupations, the NCO 2015, that documents 2,945 occupations across 439 families. Then we have, it is in alignment with the ILO standards. Then we have the Periodic Labor Force Survey that documents occupational data and labor data, not only from a state level but also a district level. Then we have NSDC, even has a skills intelligence platform or a PLFS dashboard. So the skeleton basically exists, but kind of bringing it together in a proper framework is something that does not exist at this point, to be able to predict as to, in every state, in every local municipality, or if in every district for that matter, which kind of jobs are going to be affected and how should the skilling be done. And that is something that the iceberg index or the paper heavily focused on. Now coming to, can Skill India pull it off? Now here, before I go ahead and tell you was Skill India a success or not, I would like to just give a couple of data points here. India trains fewer than 7 million people annually. 12 million people enter the workforce each year. This is the first data point. The second is only 16% of the firms in India have in-house training, compared to 80% in China. Then coming to, only 42.6% of Indian graduates were employable in 2024 as per 2024 data, compared to 44% in 2023. So that data point is also falling. And regarding the placement record of the flagship scheme, the data that we have, that is very scary under the PMKVY scheme, which the placement rate has stood at 41%, and in certain phases it has fallen even below 10%. There have been fraudulent experiences with, people submitting, sort of fake job approval forms and offer letters, fake offer letters. So that is kind of denting the entire system, the entire scheme. So the Skill India, in my opinion, has not been a successful venture so far. However, again saying, I feel that there is a structural mismatch in the Skill India program entirely, because I feel that it was designed to employ semi-skilled people into the formal economy, which is carpenters, plumbers, somebody doing sort of retail workers for that matter, to, a much, let's say the lower rung of the white collared job, or the formal economy to be specific, the clerical jobs, training them. But in that area of, reskilling cognitive workers, is something that the Skill India campaign has not been able to be completely successful at. So the process, the procedure, and the entire campaign in general, the entire scheme of PMKVY needs to be relooked and revisited, especially when this kind of disruption through AI is coming into the picture. Then comes the third question, will it eat the Sarkari Babu? Now there are two answers to this. Technical answer is yes. Political answer is very slowly and gradually. Here, of course, you have these Indian government jobs where there are specifically data entry jobs. There are specifically, preparing a particular document and that getting signed by the Sarkari Babus. Now, definitely AI can do all of this. It'll flag errors, it'll check, any kind of punctuation issues, any kind of, format, template, it'll give you everything. but the signature at the end of the day has to be done by a human. So and accountability, specifically I would like to bring democracy here.
Right.
Accountability is one of the very important facets or pillars, I would say, of democracy. Right. So this is where I would say the sarkari babus will not vanish overnight, and AI will not be replacing completely, but definitely certain clerical jobs like data entry. Probably what I feel is right now, the people who are already employed, they will not be fired, but fresh hiring will not happen. Right. There will be another process in place where certain areas where AI can easily kind of replace those jobs, there fresh hiring will stop.
Right. Bidisha, that brings us to the end of our episode today. Thank you so much for an engaging conversation as always. I will admit that I have always been very scared of economics. I dropped it in my 11th grade. I chose political science instead, and you've made it far easier for me to engage with the subject. Thank you so much for your questions that always keep us curious and sharp. We'll be back again next week with another episode of Bidishanomics.